Before dawn, Culiacan slept under a heavy sky. Streetlights flickered across empty intersections, the air thick with the weight of something unspoken. For a moment, the city was still, the kind of stillness that happens before a storm breaks, when even the dogs stop barking, and silence feels like a warning. Then the stillness cracked. Sirens in the distance, phone screens lighting up, voices over police radios murmuring code words no one wanted to hear. Somewhere outside the city, on a stretch of highway lined with dust and dry brush, a discovery was made, one so shocking it stopped the country in its tracks. By the time the sun touched the rooftops of Culiacan, fear had already spread faster than daylight. Whispers turned into headlines. Helicopters began to circle. Neighbors locked doors, scrolling through messages that spoke of something terrible near a bridge just outside town. Authorities moved quickly, cordoning off the area, setting up floodlights, and facing the same disbelief etched across the faces of everyone watching. They found vehicles abandoned by the roadside, traces of violence, and signs that a brutal message had been left for the world to see. The story would dominate national media before noon. Reports spoke of 20 victims in what officials called an act of deliberate intimidation. The Sinaloa State Prosecutor's Office confirmed it was one of the most disturbing discoveries in recent years, a signal that the fragile peace in Culiacan had been shattered again. For those who live here, the fear was familiar. This wasn't the first time Culiacan had woken up to the aftermath of a cartel conflict, but this was different. The precision, the scale, and the timing all suggested something larger, a message written not in words, but in spectacle. Behind the headlines, a deeper war was unfolding, a war between powerful factions once united under the same banner, the Sinaloa Cartel. Analysts had warned that the arrest of Ismael El Mayo Zambada and internal rifts between Los Chapitos and La Mayiza had left the organization fractured, unstable, and desperate to prove dominance. Experts say that in Sinaloa, violence is often a language, each act a sentence, each display a punctuation mark meant for rivals, politicians, and the public. The bridge was chosen for a reason. It wasn't just a place of transit. It was a statement of ownership, of fear, of control. Within hours, online videos flooded every platform, shaky, blurred clips recorded from car windows. Most were taken down for their content, but not before millions saw the flashing lights, the long line of police vehicles, the outlines of something unspeakable beneath the bridge. The internet had turned tragedy into a spectacle of speculation. As the city trembled beneath the weight of unanswered questions, one thing became clear: this wasn't an isolated act. It was part of a much larger struggle for power, money, and survival. And over the next 3 hours, we'll retrace what led to that morning, how alliances broke, how fear spread, and how 20 lost lives came to symbolize the fight for control of Sinaloa. You are watching True Crime Cartel Originals. Before we dive into today's story, I've got one small favor to ask. If you love deep, real stories like this, tap the like button, hit subscribe, and drop a comment below telling us which city you're watching from. It helps more than you know, and it allows us to keep bringing you stories no one else dares to tell. Now, let's get into the story. To understand the violence that erupted in Sinaloa, you first have to understand Culiacan itself, a city that glitters by day and burns with secrets by night. On the surface, it's like any other prosperous state capital in Mexico: modern malls, luxury SUVs cruising palm-lined avenues, families dining under golden lights in open-air restaurants. But beneath that polished exterior runs a current of fear and silent loyalty, an invisible system that everyone feels but no one dares to name, a city where power doesn't just belong to politicians, but to men who move in shadows and command armies without uniforms. For decades, Sinaloa has been known as the birthplace of Mexico's most powerful traffickers, men like Joaquin El Chapo Guzman and Ismael El Mayo Zambada, names whispered in every corner bar and schoolyard, both feared and mythologized. These were not just criminals to the people here, they were symbols of rebellion, survival, and the illusion of untouchable wealth. Songs were written about them, murals painted in their honor, and in certain neighborhoods, mentioning their names felt almost sacred, as if invoking spirits that watched over the streets. But every empire has its fractures, and in Sinaloa, those cracks began to show the moment El Chapo was captured and extradited to the United States. His fall created a vacuum, one that no single leader could fill. Within the ranks, two worlds collided, the old guard loyal to El Mayo, and the new generation led by El Chapo's sons, Los Chapitos. What followed was a silent, creeping civil war, one fought not on battlefields, but through kidnappings, ambushes, and coded messages scrawled on the walls of Culiacan's forgotten streets. By 2024, tensions were boiling. Anonymous messages began appearing online, threatening rival factions. Trucks filled with armed men were seen moving through rural roads near Jesus Maria, the same area that once erupted during the infamous Culiacanazo. Locals whispered that something was brewing again, that the quiet was too deep, that the cartel's hierarchy had begun to eat itself from within. Every rumor carried weight, every silence carried warning. Economically, Culiacan thrived, but its prosperity was a mirage built on fear. Behind every nightclub and construction project, people suspected hidden money, narco investment, and political deals sealed with a handshake and a threat. The police drove the same streets they feared to patrol, journalists wrote stories they couldn't publish under their own names. In Sinaloa, survival meant understanding what not to see. In this city, you can feel the tension even in the air, the kind that never quite dissipates. A stranger asking too many questions draws eyes, a black SUV slowing at an intersection makes every bystander hold their breath. People smile, laugh, go to work, but deep down, they know the truth. The cartel isn't just a presence. It's the system itself. It decides who gets rich, who disappears, and who lives long enough to tell the story. The roots of this empire stretch far back, to the 1980s, when Sinaloa's fertile valleys became the heart of the global drug trade. What began as small smuggling routes evolved into a billion-dollar operation spanning continents. Every corner of the world, from Los Angeles to London, felt the reach of Sinaloa's network. But with power comes rivalry, and with rivalry comes blood. Culiacan learned to live with it, until, once again, that uneasy peace shattered in the most brutal way possible. As the new year of 2025 approached, the city was already on edge. Factional betrayals, missing operatives, and intercepted messages hinted at a coming storm. Government intelligence quietly warned of escalating clashes, but on the surface, life went on, festivals, fireworks, and laughter filled the streets. No one knew that within days, Sinaloa would make international headlines again, not for celebration, but for horror. The signal came in whispers, that a powerful group had struck out to reclaim lost ground. The violence that followed would not only reignite fear across Sinaloa, but announce a new phase of Mexico's internal cartel war, one marked not by profit, but by revenge and demonstration. A message meant to remind everyone, from rival factions to the government itself, who truly controls the land of the valleys. And so, when 20 lives were taken and displayed under the open sky of Culiacan, it wasn't a random act of cruelty, it was a declaration. A calculated response to betrayal. A warning that the old order was gone, and a new one had just begun to write its story in fire and fear. That's where our investigation begins, with a message carved not just in headlines, but in the memory of a city that has learned to live with ghosts. It began just before sunrise, that fleeting moment when the world still belongs to silence. A pair of early commuters noticed something unusual on the old highway leading out of Culiacan, near the industrial outskirts where trucks rumble past in the dark and the city's hum feels distant. They slowed down, headlights cutting through the fog, uncertain whether to look closer or keep driving. But something about the scene ahead felt wrong, so wrong that one of them reached for the phone, hands trembling as they dialed emergency services, whispering into the receiver words they could barely form. Within minutes, the first patrol car arrived, its flashing lights painting the fog red and blue, the radio crackling with confused voices. Officers stepped out cautiously, their boots crunching on gravel, each movement slow, deliberate, like walking into a nightmare they hadn't yet identified. The air felt heavy, thick with dread, and as they advanced with flashlights raised, the full magnitude of what they had stumbled upon began to take shape. Word spread fast. Within half an hour, local police were joined by state investigators and members of the National Guard. The perimeter expanded, reporters began to gather, and the sleepy edge of the city transformed into a stage of chaos. Drones buzzed overhead, journalists spoke in hurried tones, and neighbors, drawn by curiosity and fear, watched from afar as the once quiet bridge became the epicenter of something that would soon shake the entire nation. The first official statement came through the Sinaloa State Prosecutor's office just after 8 a.m. They confirmed the unimaginable: 20 victims found across multiple sites in Culiacan and surrounding areas, some near that same bridge where authorities were still collecting evidence. The motive? Unknown. The suspects? Unidentified. But everyone understood what it meant. This was not a random act of violence. It was a coordinated message, written in terror, meant to echo across Mexico. By noon, national outlets had arrived, broadcasting live from behind yellow tape. Helicopters hovered above, and the hum of generators mixed with the voices of reporters describing what little they knew. Culiacan, once again, had become a global headline. Images and videos leaked online faster than authorities could control, fueling panic and speculation. Some said it was the work of Los Chapitos, others blamed La Maiza, and a few believed it was retaliation from smaller cells trying to prove they still mattered. The government responded swiftly, promising an immediate and comprehensive investigation. But residents had heard those words before. They knew the rhythm, the statements, the press briefings, the denials, and the silence that follows when too many powerful names hang in the balance. In Sinaloa, investigations often lead nowhere, not because there are no answers, but because the truth itself is dangerous. Throughout that day, tension gripped the streets. Schools closed early. Businesses shuttered. Parents hurried home before sunset. The hum of helicopters was constant, their shadows crawling across rooftops as if tracing the veins of the city. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew retaliation could come at any moment. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, investigators worked through layers of misinformation and fear. They analyzed phone intercepts, traced license plates, and reviewed surveillance footage showing suspicious convoys moving just hours before the discovery. But even as they pieced together the evidence, something larger loomed, an invisible hand guiding events from somewhere above, someone powerful enough to orchestrate chaos without leaving fingerprints. The mayor of Culiacan appeared on television that night, visibly shaken but careful with his words. He called for calm, promised security, and reminded residents that the city remains under control. Yet as he spoke, viewers noticed the tremor in his voice, not from grief, but from fear. Because everyone knew, control in Sinaloa is an illusion, one that changes hands with every gunshot in the night. And as the day turned to night, the story was only beginning. For the authorities, it was a crisis. For the cartels, it was a statement. But for the people of Culiacan, it was something far more personal, a reminder that no matter how normal life seemed, they were living inside a war zone disguised as a city. The question wasn't who did it anymore. It was what comes next. For decades, the Sinaloa Cartel stood as the blueprint for narco power, disciplined, organized, and globally connected. It survived arrests, betrayals, and government crackdowns because it wasn't built around a single man, but a structure, a system where loyalty and profit were stronger than law. Yet, even the strongest systems collapse when power stops being shared and starts being challenged. After El Chapo Guzman's capture in 2016, that collapse began quietly, like a slow internal bleed that no one could stop. At the heart of the fracture were Los Chapitos, El Chapo's sons, young, unpredictable, and fiercely loyal to their father's legacy. Ivan Archivaldo, Jesus Alfredo, and Ovidio Guzman inherited not just a name, but an empire in pieces. They saw themselves as rightful heirs, determined to reclaim the respect and control their father once commanded. But their rise came with enemies, and none more powerful than the old guard, led by El Mayo Zambada, a man whose influence stretched across generations and whose silence spoke louder than any threat. For years, El Mayo and El Chapo had maintained an uneasy alliance, one built on mutual need and the understanding that both men were too powerful to destroy each other. But alliances built on fear are fragile. When Los Chapitos began asserting themselves, taking over routes and commanding loyalty through youth and money, that fragile balance snapped. Old loyalties were tested. Entire regions split overnight. The organization that once ran like a single machine began turning its gears against itself. The divide wasn't just about leadership, it was about philosophy. The old guard believed in discretion, diplomacy, and quiet power. The new generation wanted spectacle, fear as a brand, violence as communication. They grew up in the era of social media, where a convoy of armored trucks filmed on a smartphone could become propaganda. To them, dominance wasn't maintained in whispers but announced in the open. And that change in tone reshaped the entire landscape of Mexican organized crime. El Mayo's network still held the deeper connections, to Colombian suppliers, to corrupt officials, to the old intelligence channels that kept them safe for decades. But Los Chapitos had something else, fearlessness. They didn't just fight to maintain control, they fought to prove a point, that the old way of doing business was over, and the new Sinaloa belonged to them. In the mountains, in cities, and along the border, smaller cells were forced to choose sides. And once they did, neutrality became impossible. In early 2025, intelligence briefings hinted at escalating clashes across rural Sinaloa, ambushes, disappearances, and convoys spotted near Culiacan and Guasave. What officials didn't say publicly was that these were not isolated acts. They were signals. Each attack marked territory, each disappearance a warning. The cartels had moved past negotiation. Now, every bullet, every convoy, every headline carried a coded message, and the bridge outside Culiacan was the punctuation mark on that message. Inside the cartel, betrayal is the only predictable outcome. Informants became targets, families were relocated overnight, and safe houses shifted every few days. Even trusted lieutenants began double-dealing, feeding intelligence to both factions, trying to survive a war where loyalty could be fatal. The higher the stakes climbed, the bloodier the silence between them became. Every leader knew that this time, there would be no truce, because pride had replaced profit as the goal. When Ovidio Guzman, El Chapo's son, was captured by Mexican authorities in early 2023 and later extradited to the U.S., it sent shockwaves through the cartel's core. The Chapitos saw it as betrayal from within. Someone had tipped off his location, someone close. That paranoia metastasized. They began hunting leaks, cutting ties, and retaliating against anyone suspected of disloyalty. The fear that followed didn't just paralyze rivals, it paralyzed allies. Experts warned that the Sinaloa conflict was no longer local. The organization's internal war was destabilizing entire regions, Sonora, Durango, even Baja California. Smaller gangs aligned themselves for survival, feeding into a growing storm that Mexico's security forces could barely contain. And at the center of that storm stood Culiacan, the beating heart of the empire, pulsing with power, money, and fear. So when 20 lives were taken in that coordinated strike, it wasn't just a massacre, it was the culmination of years of betrayal, pride, and revenge. It was the sound of an empire tearing itself apart, echoing through valleys and cities that had lived too long under one name, Sinaloa. And though the violence seemed to end that morning, insiders knew better. The message was clear, the war had only just begun. The day after the discovery, Culiacan woke under a sun that felt heavier than usual, the kind of light that doesn't brighten, only exposes. Streets that were once full of traffic now felt hollow, echoing with unease. Shopkeepers opened late, if at all, children stayed home from school, and entire neighborhoods moved through the motions of daily life as if pretending everything was fine could somehow make it true. There's a silence that follows violence, not the absence of sound, but the weight of what people are too afraid to say. By afternoon, soldiers patrolled the main avenues, slow-moving convoys of green trucks, their rifles angled toward the asphalt. Journalists stood behind barriers, narrating updates that said little and revealed less. On social media, residents warned each other about blocked roads and suspicious convoys, but the official tone remained calm. The truth, however, traveled by whisper, the kind of whispered warnings exchanged in line at grocery stores or murmured between drivers at red lights. In homes across the city, families watched the news in silence. Every report blurred into the next, official statements, speculation, denials. Mothers turned down the volume so children wouldn't hear the words that filled every channel. Fathers checked their phones for messages that might confirm or contradict the news. Outside, the hum of helicopters never stopped. It was the new soundtrack of Culiacan, blades cutting through the sky, reminding everyone that the peace they once knew had become a ghost. As night fell, the city held its breath. Every sound became suspicious, the pop of a motorcycle backfire, the slam of a car door, even the barking of dogs in the distance. People turned off porch lights, locked their gates, and sent prayers into the dark. Somewhere, in the hills beyond the city, new alliances were being made, and everyone knew that if violence had arrived once, it could arrive again at any time, without warning. For those who lost loved ones, there were no public funerals, no open mourning. In Sinaloa, grief is often silent, hidden behind closed doors and drawn curtains. Families hold their pain in private because speaking too loudly can be dangerous. A single question asked in the wrong place, a name mentioned in the wrong tone, can make you disappear. Here, even sorrow must be strategic. Local journalists tried to piece together what had happened, but most hit walls faster than they could type. Sources refused to talk, officials offered vague answers, and colleagues warned each other to stop asking questions. In Culiacan, journalism isn't just a profession, it's a gamble. Every article carries a cost, and sometimes that cost is life itself. Many reporters quietly shelved their investigations, choosing safety over truth. Meanwhile, the city adapted. It always does. People returned to work, taxis filled the streets again, markets reopened. On the surface, everything looked normal, but beneath that thin layer of routine, the city's pulse beat differently. Every conversation was cautious, every stranger regarded with suspicion. Even laughter carried an edge, as if everyone knew that joy, here, was temporary. Weeks passed, and authorities announced new arrests, new leads, and new promises. But for the residents of Culiacan, those words had lost their meaning. They had seen it all before, the cycle of outrage, the show of force, and the quiet fading of justice into silence. What remains isn't faith in institutions, it's endurance. The quiet resilience of a people who have learned to live surrounded by danger, yet refuse to surrender their humanity. At night, from the city's higher hills, you can see the lights of Culiacan stretch endlessly across the valley, a glittering map of survival. Somewhere in those lights are stories untold, of families divided by fear, of young men drawn into the cycle of power, of ordinary people trying to build a life in a city that keeps daring them to hope. It's beautiful and tragic all at once, a place where every sunrise feels like a victory, and every sunset a warning. In Sinaloa, the past never stays buried. Every act of violence leaves an echo that drifts through the streets, whispered from generation to generation. The 20 lost souls of that morning became part of that echo, not statistics, but reminders. And though the city has learned to move on, it never truly forgets. The silence that follows each tragedy is an emptiness. It's memory, heavy, constant, and waiting for the next name to be added to it. When 20 bodies appeared in Sinaloa, the story didn't end there, it was just the visible ripple on a vast ocean of hidden movement. Beneath the surface, a global network shifted, adapting, recalibrating. From the hills of Badiraguado to the ports of Manzanillo, from Culiacan's quiet streets to the neon skyline of Los Angeles, every bullet fired in Sinaloa sends a message that echoes across continents. Because this isn't just local bloodshed, it's part of an economy, one built on addiction, power, and the silent cooperation of thousands who will never appear in the news. It starts small, a farmer tending to a hidden patch of poppies high in the Sierra Madre Mountains. The air is thin, the soil dry, and the risk is everything. But when the sun sets, those flowers are more valuable than gold. Harvested, cooked, and packaged in makeshift labs that dot the hillsides like ghosts of industry, they become the lifeblood of a billion-dollar trade. From those lonely mountains, the chain begins, a silent production line of survival and desperation. In hidden warehouses outside Culiacan, chemists work quietly, their faces covered, their hands moving fast under flickering lights. There's no conversation, just the sound of boiling liquid, clinking glass, and the hum of generators. Outside, armed guards smoke cigarettes, watching the road for headlights that don't belong. What they're producing doesn't stay here, it's already bought, paid for, and promised to people thousands of miles away. Once packaged, the journey begins, convoys at night, trucks hidden among fruit shipments, and small aircraft that vanish into the sky without flight plans. At the coast, containers marked with false paperwork are loaded onto ships bound for Asia, Europe, and the United States. Every shipment is a gamble, every route a test of ingenuity against global surveillance. And yet, somehow, most of them make it through. By the time the product reaches American soil, it's unrecognizable, repackaged, redistributed, and renamed. It flows through networks of dealers and gangs, trickling into neighborhoods that will never know its origin. A hit in Chicago, a deal in Houston, a nightclub overdose in Miami, all threads tied back to one unseen source, the quiet factories of Sinaloa, where violence funds the illusion of power. The money moves differently, fast, quiet, invisible. Through shell companies, casinos, real estate, and cryptocurrencies, billions of dollars wash clean every year. A luxury condo in Mexico City, a restaurant in Madrid, a warehouse in Vancouver, each one a piece of the puzzle. Every transaction builds a wall of legitimacy around something that began in blood and fire. And while governments announce new task forces and raids, the truth is that this system feeds on both sides, demand and denial. Every crackdown breeds innovation, every headline hides another shipment already on its way. The cartels have evolved beyond borders. They're corporations now, fluent in trade, finance, and politics. Violence isn't just control, it's strategy. In this global ecosystem, even the smallest act in Culiacan can spark consequences half a world away. A single arrest can shift market prices. A single death can trigger retaliation that spills across oceans. It's not chaos, it's choreography, designed by people who understand that power isn't about visibility, but control. And in that sense, the 20 bodies in Sinaloa weren't just victims, they were messages written in blood, sent across the world. Back in Sinaloa, the men who orchestrate this remain untouchable, living behind walls taller than trees, surrounded by loyalty bought with fear. They host weddings that look like royal events, baptisms guarded by convoys, and parties where even the music hides coded messages. They are both myth and man, heroes in their hometowns, ghosts everywhere else. And so the circle turns. For every life taken, 10 more enter the trade. For every raid, a new route opens. The violence in Culiacan isn't an isolated tragedy, it's the heartbeat of a machine that spans continents. To understand it, you can't just look at the crime. You have to look at the world that depends on it, the millions of lives it quietly touches, and the system that keeps pretending it can stop what it secretly sustains. Behind every shootout, every bridge, every headline soaked in blood, there's a meeting that no one photographs. A quiet dinner, a handshake, a promise whispered over a table set with crystal and silver. The world wants to believe cartels operate in the shadows, but the truth is darker, they thrive in the half-light, in the spaces between power and denial. And if you follow the money long enough, it doesn't lead to the mountains. It leads to boardrooms, offices, and private jets. In Culiacan, power isn't defined by uniforms or titles, it's measured by silence. Those who know the truth rarely speak, and those who speak rarely live long. Officials attend funerals for men they once protected, police units raid warehouses they used to guard, and judges sign papers that decide fates they already know are meaningless. It's a dance, carefully choreographed, eternally repeated. Whispers inside the government suggest that some of the most violent nights in Sinaloa weren't accidents, but signals, power plays disguised as chaos. A raid that goes wrong, a convoy ambushed in broad daylight, a mistaken shootout. Each one a coded message between factions too powerful to speak openly. In this world, violence isn't disorder, it's communication. Money is the language that connects them all. Politicians need it, cartels control it, and corporations wash it. Construction contracts, agricultural subsidies, fake import deals, paper trails that look legitimate until you read between the lines. Billions flow through these veins every year, and not all of it ends up in the hands of criminals. Some of it builds schools, hospitals, and campaigns, proof that in Mexico, morality is negotiable. Investigative journalists have traced these lines for years, names erased, stories buried, evidence destroyed. Some of the most courageous voices have vanished without explanation, their last reports unfinished drafts left open on computer screens. The message is always clear: truth here isn't a right, it's a risk. Every election season, the alliances shift. Promises are made, debts repaid, loyalties bought and sold like stocks. Publicly, the speeches are about reform, justice, and security. Privately, the conversations are about stability, not peace, but predictability. Because for those at the top, a controlled war is better than uncontrolled silence. In the United States, billions are spent on the war on drugs, but that war is profitable, too. Every bust, every seizure, every headline funds another budget, another contract, another political promise. And for every kilo intercepted, 10 more slip through. It's a system that punishes symptoms while protecting the disease, a partnership of convenience hidden behind patriotic slogans. Whistleblowers have tried to expose it: the banks laundering cartel cash, the politicians accepting campaign funds, the corporations turning a blind eye to supply chain links. But exposure only matters if people care to look. Most don't. Because the truth isn't just frightening, it's exhausting. And so, the cycle continues, powered by denial, sustained by profit. When asked who truly runs Sinaloa, locals smile and shrug. Not because they don't know, but because they've learned that knowledge is dangerous. The real power doesn't parade through the streets with guns, it moves through phone calls, contracts, and quiet nods. It wears suits, not masks. It kills reputations before it kills people. And it never gets caught, because it never gets dirty. So when 20 bodies hang from bridges and headlines scream of violence, remember, what you're seeing is only the visible part, the performance. The real war happens behind closed doors, in whispers, in ledgers, and in decisions made far from the gunfire. Culiacan is just the stage. The actors change, but the script never does. In Sinaloa, children grow up learning 2 languages, Spanish and silence. From the time they can walk, they understand what can be said and what cannot. They know which questions are dangerous, which streets to avoid, and which names to never repeat. Before they can spell their own, they already know the meaning of one word: plata o plomo, silver or lead. It isn't taught in school, it's learned in whispers, in glances, in the way adults pause before answering. In the hills around Culiacan, narco culture isn't hidden, it's heritage. Corridos play from car stereos, telling stories of men who rose from poverty to power, from hunger to legend. Their songs are lullabies for some, war cries for others. Every lyric celebrates defiance, a dangerous kind of hope born from desperation. And for young listeners, it's not just music. It's a roadmap to survival. Ask a teenager in Culiacan who their heroes are, and you might hear names of men the world calls criminals. But here, there's something else: providers, protectors, symbols of pride. They build churches, fund schools, hand out cash at festivals. They're both saints and sinners, villains and saviors. In a place where the state's promises come too late, the cartel becomes the system. In this world, violence doesn't just happen, it's inherited. Fathers lost to shootouts, brothers taken by raids, sons drawn into a war that never officially began. Entire families live between grief and pride, mourning what they lost while glorifying what they became. Each generation promises to break free, and yet somehow, the cycle tightens. Because when fear becomes familiar, it feels like home. Even faith here has adapted. Church walls bear the names of donors no priest dares question. Crosses rise beside graves guarded by marble angels and armed men. Prayers mix with gunfire, and hope becomes a currency of its own, traded, borrowed, sometimes stolen. In Sinaloa, salvation is negotiable, but loyalty is sacred. You can see the weight of it in the faces of the old, men who remember quieter days, women who lost entire bloodlines to battles fought over nothing. They sit outside their homes in the fading light, listening to the distant echo of fireworks or gunshots, never sure which is which. For them, survival isn't victory. It's habit. And yet, there's beauty here, wild, stubborn beauty that refuses to die. The same mountains that hide the violence also protect the traditions. Festivals still fill the streets with color. Children still chase kites through sugarcane fields. Families still gather for Sunday meals, laughing through the fear. Because even in darkness, life insists on being lived. Artists paint murals of peace on walls still scarred by bullets. Teachers teach children to dream beyond the valley, even as helicopters circle above their classrooms. Hope in Sinaloa isn't naive, it's rebellious. It's the quiet decision to keep believing that one day, the gunfire will stop long enough for the city to hear itself breathe again. Still, the shadows linger. Every celebration carries an undercurrent of loss. Every wedding toast hides the names of those who should have been there. Every victory feels borrowed, temporary, like a fragile piece held together by memory. Because in Sinaloa, joy is brave. To smile here is to defy the odds. And as the night falls once more over Culiacan, the music rises again, not to glorify, but to remember. The corridos echo through the streets like prayers for a country that keeps losing pieces of itself. The people of Sinaloa carry their pain in rhythm, their memories in melody. They have learned that even if peace never stays, the song always does. By late summer, the whispers had turned into gunfire. Inside Culiacan, the streets once again became battlefields, not between rivals, but between brothers. Something had broken inside the Sinaloa Cartel, something deep and irreparable. What began as quiet rumors of betrayal had become open war. Convoys of armed men roamed the city at night, their engines echoing through neighborhoods like thunder. Nobody knew who was hunting who anymore. All they knew was that the rules, the unspoken laws that once kept chaos contained, were gone. The conflict started where loyalty died. A shipment vanished. A lieutenant went missing. Then, a body appeared, bound, burned, displayed. Each killing answered the last, a spiral of vengeance so fast that even those inside the war couldn't keep track. Men who had shared meals and secrets were now hunting each other across city blocks. Old alliances turned to dust overnight. The silence that once protected everyone had shattered, and now, nothing was sacred. Culiacan fell into a rhythm of terror. By morning, the city looked normal, the markets opened, children walked to school, traffic lights changed on time. But by dusk, the skyline changed. Checkpoints appeared, roads closed, cell service vanished. The people learned to read the air, the way birds scattered, the sudden stillness of dogs, the low hum of engines in the distance. Every sound carried meaning. Every hour could be the last. At the center of it all were names that once commanded respect, now spoken only in whispers. Factions loyal to Los Chapitos clashed with those aligned to the old guard. Every betrayal was personal. Every bullet carried a signature. Bodies began appearing not for control, but for message, hung from bridges, displayed on billboards, left where everyone could see. The point wasn't to hide the violence. The point was to prove who owned it. The Mexican army moved in, thousands of soldiers, armored vehicles, helicopters slicing through the night sky. Officially, it was a mission to restore order. Unofficially, it was a negotiation made with bullets. The city became a chessboard, every neighborhood a pawn, every street corner a gamble. Civilians hid in their homes, whispering prayers between bursts of gunfire. From above, Culiacan looked like a war zone. From within, it felt like the end of the world. But this was never just a fight for territory, it was a purge. The younger generation wanted power without permission, freedom without fear. They didn't want to inherit the empire, they wanted to reinvent it. And that meant removing anyone who still believed in the old rules. The streets of Sinaloa became confession booths, where loyalty was tested, and sins were paid for in blood. Meanwhile, foreign eyes watched closely. U.S. intelligence, Mexican agencies, rival cartels, everyone knew something was collapsing. But chaos has a way of creating opportunity. As Sinaloa tore itself apart, others moved in quietly, buying, infiltrating, observing. In the underworld, destruction isn't the end. It's the beginning of the next empire. By the third week, the city's morgues were overflowing. Hospitals ran out of beds. Families dug shallow graves in secret. The local news stopped counting casualties. For every body found, 2 more disappeared. The violence was no longer strategic, it was emotional, desperate, primal. And as each side lost control, the line between cartel war and civil war blurred. Then, suddenly, it stopped. The gunfire faded. The convoys vanished. For the first time in weeks, Culiacan was quiet again, too quiet. It wasn't peace. It was pause. Everyone knew what it meant, someone had won. Or maybe everyone had lost. In this world, victories don't come with parades, they come with silence. No one ever confirmed who ordered the killings. No one ever admitted who gave the green light. But the message was clear, Sinaloa had changed. Power had devoured itself and been reborn. And the 20 bodies that started it all? They were just the opening act in a story that was still being written, one bullet at a time. When the smoke finally cleared, the world began to look towards Sinaloa, not with compassion, but with fascination. The headlines were everywhere: 20 bodies found in Culiacan, cartel war erupts in Mexico's heartland, bodies hung from bridges as city burns. For a few days, the world couldn't look away. It was tragedy packaged as spectacle, horror dressed as headline. In Mexico City, government spokesmen promised justice. Press conferences were held. New operations were announced. Helicopters took off for the cameras, and armored vehicles rolled through the capital's avenues, symbols of strength painted in military green. But inside Sinaloa, the people just watched their screens in silence. They had seen this performance before. Across the border, in Washington, D.C., analysts filled their screens with maps, timelines, and theories. Every headline fed into the same question: is the Sinaloa Cartel finally collapsing? But the truth was more complicated. The cartel wasn't dying, it was evolving. Like a storm changing shape, it was shedding old layers and forming new ones, harder, faster, more unpredictable. Meanwhile, journalists descended on Culiacan, drawn by the allure of danger. They photographed the bullet holes, the charred vehicles, the blood-stained walls. Each frame became a commodity, traded for clicks and airtime. But what the photos couldn't capture was the silence, the way the city breathed differently now, slower, heavier, cautious. In the neighborhoods where the bodies had been found, life resumed almost mechanically. Street vendors reopened. Children played soccer beside walls still marked with gunfire. At first glance, it seemed like resilience. But if you listen closely, you'd hear what was really there: not recovery, but exhaustion. People weren't moving on. They were just trying to keep moving. Even among cartel insiders, the mood had shifted. The codes of silence, the oaths of loyalty, the pride in the name Sinaloa, they all felt fragile now. The new generation wasn't fighting for tradition, they were fighting for survival. And survival, in this business, meant something darker. It meant doing whatever it took, even if it meant burning the world that made you. The violence had been filmed, posted, and shared millions of times. Each video clip, each blurred face, each echoing gunshot, became part of a global story told through fear. But for the people living it, those weren't stories. They were days. They were memories that would never fade, playing on repeat long after the world had scrolled past. In the weeks that followed, Sinaloa became both infamous and invisible. Everyone knew the name, but few understood the reality. Tourists avoided the region, investors pulled out, and families quietly packed what they could and disappeared overnight. The map of Culiacan began to change, not in shape, but in soul. Yet amid the ashes, something familiar began to stir again: the hum of business, the coded phone calls, the quiet meetings in unmarked warehouses. Because in Sinaloa, the cycle never ends. It pauses, it mutates, and then it resumes, stronger, smarter, colder. Violence is not the interruption. It's the rhythm. And while the world moved on to the next crisis, Culiacan stayed behind, haunted, proud, unbroken. The streets that once ran with fear now whispered a warning: this is not the end. It never is. In the land where power grows from silence and blood, every ending is just a new beginning, waiting for the next name to fall, the next bullet to echo, the next headline to break.